And yet, I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
We can use these off-the-shelf components.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Was Stockton Rush an engineer or a salesman? Let's take a look at how Rush got his start in building submersibles. It's kind of unexpected. Did he really innovate? Did he imitate, or did he simply take something that already existed and retrofit it? What do you think is the answer? Honestly, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to look inside the Titan and see something more akin to a college research project than something with NASA or Boeing's fingerprint on it. Let's review the engineering journey from 2009 to the Titan. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Incidentally, I'll be following up this analysis with another episode called Lockridge Gate, where we'll deal with the Scotsman and his journey through the trials and tribulations working for OceanGate. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So, according to the New Yorker, quote, in 2009, Stockton Rush co-founded OceanGate, and his dream was to bring tourists to the ocean world, and that word really needs to be highlighted. Right? It's about tourism at the end of the day. And so he said his sort of foundational psychology was that he'd come across this business anomaly that he couldn't explain. If so much of the planet is water, how come most of us can't access most of it? You're going to see that although the dream is deep sea tourism, the CEO would go to a lot of lengths, go to a lot of trouble to disguise this. For example, by getting his tourist customers to call themselves mission specialists, and to take the contrivance even further by getting his own crew to adopt the posture and the jargon of space rockets and astronauts when doing his own launches.
Rangers go for lunch.
A recent article in the New York Times also reiterates this idea of OceanGate expressing itself in the language of space travel. According to the article, quote, OceanGate spoke in the language of space travel. There was Command Central, a mission director, the Launch and Recovery Platform, LARS, and a countdown to launch. Another section of the article reads, the paying passengers were called mission specialists, and the company requested that they not be referred to as customers or tourists or passengers. They were given shirts and jackets embroidered with their names and the flags of their countries. A patch on the sleeve read, Titanic Survey Exploration Crew. Now you're going to see in our later analysis that this decision to call tourists members of the public, basically to associate them with crew and encourage them to be active members of a crew, there's actually a legal aspect to that. That means the company can't be held liable if something happens to a crew, whereas they can be held liable if something happens to someone in this situation, members of the public. So that is not just incidental. Anyway, we will deal with that in more detail when we deal with the legal aspect. If we're talking true science and innovation, here's the rub. And once again, we're going back to that New Yorker article. Quote, OceanGate's first submersible wasn't made by the company itself. It was built, get this, in 1973, and Leahy later piloted it in the North Sea while working in the oil and gas industry. In the 90s, so about 20 years later, he helped refit it into a tourist submersible. And in 2009, after it had been sold a few times and renamed Antipodes, OceanGate bought it, end quote. Let's review that. OceanGate's first submersible was a refitted oil and gas submersible built in 1973. In other words, this innovative company were buying a 36-year-old craft, right? In other words, 36-year-old tech, essentially old technology from a previous generation. Now, I don't know about you, do you have a car that is 36 years old or older? Going back to the article, quote, I didn't have any direct interaction with them at the time, Leahy recalled. Stockton was one of these people that was buying these older subs and trying to repurpose them. Incidentally, this guy Leahy, his name is Patrick Leahy, he's the president of Triton Submarines, and that is a company that's got a name very similar to Titan. Titan. One does wonder whether Stockton Rush was trying to perhaps even intentionally get the two names confused. But what are we talking about here? So let's review this whole thing. OceanGate's first submersible was a refitted oil and gas submersible built in 1973. They were buying 36-year-old tech, essentially old technology from a previous generation. Leahy would go on to say, I didn't have any direct interaction with them at the time. Stockton was one of these people that was buying these older subs and trying to repurpose them. End quote. That is hardly innovative, let alone creative. The word innovative is a near cousin to invention, and that's the one thing Stockton Rush wasn't doing. He thought that by taking someone else's design and giving it his own spin, he could make it into something special, and certainly outwardly make it appear to be something special when it really wasn't. 6 years after he founded his company, and bear in mind he was taking these old submersibles and just retasking them, well then voila. Is that what happened? He suddenly produced his own submarine. Now, according to the New Yorker, quote, in 2015, OceanGate announced that it had built its first submersible in collaboration with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. In fact, it was mostly a cosmetic and electrical refit. Leahy and his partners had built the underlying vessel, called Lula, for a Portuguese marine research non-profit almost 2 decades before. It had a pressure hull that was the shape of a capsule pearl and made of steel, with a large acrylic viewport on one end. It was designed to go no deeper than 500 meters, a comfortable cruising depth for military submarines. OceanGate now called it Cyclops 1. Well, there you have it in a nutshell. The Titan concept was never Russia's and predated OceanGate by about 20 years. Most crucially, the fucker was never designed to go deeper than 500 meters, but Rush wanted it to, so he decided it would. According to the New Yorker, quote, most submersibles have duplicate control systems running on separate batteries. That way, if one system fails, the other still works. But during the refit, engineers, in other words, I guess students, at the University of Washington rigged the Cyclops 1 to run from a single PlayStation 3 controller, end quote. So what we're seeing in this quote-unquote innovative process is OceanGate affiliated engineers actually stripping away the control systems that are there, and then multiple control systems, and then replacing them with a single one. According to the article, quote, Stockton is very interested in being able to quickly train pilots. That was according to Dave Dyer, a principal engineer. He said that in a video published by his laboratory. And you kind of get this idea, it's like, hey, let's use Cyclops 1 to make Cyclops 2. And then guess what? We'll call it Titan. According to the article, around that time, Rush set his sights on the Titanic. Around the time that Cyclops 1 was being developed, he thought, wow, what we really need to do is go and see the Titanic. And OceanGate would have to design a new submersible in order to do that. According to the article in the New Yorker, quote, but Rush decided to keep most of the design elements of Cyclops 1. So Yari's decided he wants to go to the Titanic, and he's sort of developed a new submersible, but based on old tech. And now he wants to develop a newer submersible based on the refitted old submersible. going back to the article, suddenly the University of Washington was no longer involved in the project. Big surprise. Although OceanGate's contract with the Applied Physics Laboratory was less than 1/5 complete. It's unclear, according to this article, what Dyer, who did not respond to an interview request, thought of Russia's plan to essentially reconstruct a craft that was designed for 500 meters of pressure to withstand 8 times that much. As the company planned Cyclops 2, Rush reached out to McCullum for help. Now, I think I've said this before, when you're looking at some of these ultra deep sea craft, invariably the capsule which houses a person is kind of like an egg. It's a round ball-like structure, and it's not very comfortable, and it also doesn't sit that many people. And that is what you see in the Alvin. That is what you also see in Cameron's Deep Sea Challenger. Now, you may be starting to see that this is less about engineering than appropriating someone else's work, trying to have a rig to do something that's not fit for purpose, and then when they disagree, getting huffy about it. According to the article, and this is what McCullum said, he said, Dr. Rush had asked him to run his Titanic operation for him. He said at the time he was the only person that Stockton Rush knew who had run commercial expedition trips to Titanic. Stockton's plan was to go a step further and build a vehicle specifically for this multi-passenger expedition. McCullum gave him some advice on marketing and logistics and eventually visited the workshop outside Seattle, where he examined the Cyclops 1 for himself. And this is where it gets really interesting. According to the New Yorker, quote, he was disturbed by what he saw. He said everyone was drinking Kool-Aid and saying how cool they were with a Sony PlayStation. And I said at the time, does Sony know that it's being used for this application? Because, you know, this is not what it was designed for. And now you have the hand controller talking to a Wi-Fi unit, which is talking to a black box, which is talking to the subs thrusters. There were multiple points of failure. And so, according to the article, the system ran on Bluetooth, but McCullum continued, every sub in the world has hardwired controls for a reason, because if the signal drops out, you're not, in his words, fucked. And so you get a sense here that someone knows what they're talking about, and the other person is spoiled and entitled and simply wants his ways, almost just trying to push his idea through, even though it doesn't really make any sense. And so according to the article, one day McCullum climbed into the Cyclops for a test dive at a marina, and I think this was in Seattle. And there he met the chief pilot, someone you may have heard of, David Lochridge, a Scotsman who had spent 3 decades as a submersible pilot and an engineer. So he was initially in the Royal Navy, and then he worked as a private contractor. And then he worked on offshore wind farms in the North Sea. He was involved in subsea cable installations in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. He also worked on submarine trials with the Swedish Navy. He was involved in submarine rescue operations for the navies of Singapore and Britain as well. So you've got this extremely experienced submersible pilot. This guy's been in all sorts of environments, and now he takes out Stockton Rush's submersible, basically takes out his baby, right, into the harbor. And what happens? This submersible gets stuck in shallow water. And so McCullum says it was hilarious because there were four very experienced operators in the sub stuck at 20 or 25 feet, and they all had to sit there for a few hours trying to work out what to do. And then I think it was Lockridge who said, this thing is a mutt. So basically just saying that the design in terms of this is terrible. And that was the Cyclops 1. And the Cyclops 2, Titan, was to a large extent based on the Cyclops 1. And so, according to the article, Rush eventually decided that he would not attempt to have the Titanic-bound vehicle classed by a marine certification agency such as the DNV. I think the real reason is that he knew that his vehicle would fail these standard tests and fail with flying colors, if that makes sense. And so when McCullum found out that Stockton didn't want to be part of the marine certification process, he said, okay, that's it, count me out. And that then marked the end of McCullum's association with the project, according to the article. He said, the minute that I found out that he was not going to class the vehicle, that's when I said, I'm sorry, I can't be involved. But McCullum sort of wanted him to know that, you know what, we are using the brain power kind of in a cooperative way of some of these engineers that are part of the certification process to feed into our design. And that's something you can mainline into as well. But instead of being part of an authentic engineering curve, Stockton Rush didn't seem to like the idea of kowtowing and worse, paying to kowtow. You kind of get the sense that he wants to be a singular kind of a maverick, someone who stands out, and he wants to do it his way. You know, so all of this interferes with his idea of himself as a maverick and perhaps also a cheapskate, because the certification process would be quite expensive, and getting it, changing materials and improving the craft for an industry standard, maybe he realized was prohibitively expensive. But I mean, how can a kowtower be a hero? How can a kowtower steal the show? And of course, Rush was in a rush. It was 2015 at this point, and he'd been in this game 6 years and had precious little to show for it. Meanwhile, his idol, James Cameron, had already been down to twice the depth of Titanic 3 years earlier. He felt like he was falling behind. So it was time for Stockton Rush to take off the gloves and take his sub and the bluster around it to a whole new level. It was time for more breaking rules with logic and good engineering behind him. It was time for carbon fiber. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.